welcome in latest episode of that SEC podcast. We got rid of the Joker. We're back with the professional, Stephen Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. Stephen, it's been too long. Every time we go like 2 weeks without talking to you, it feels like an eternity. I hope you're well. How are you?
Mike, it is so good to be back. I missed hanging out with you and all the cousins last week. And man, what a newsy, I thought it was the off season, right, of college football with the SEC spring meetings. And of course, we got that wonderful Athlon Sports magazine out there on the newsstand. So always excited to be talking to some ball with you, Mike.
Absolutely. Well, on this episode, we're going to be breaking down the Athlon Sports official SEC predictions in the 2026 College Football Preview magazine. But before we do that, Stephen, maybe could you remind the cousins? Now, again, Stephen's got on hand 10 magazines that he's going to be signing and sending off to select cousins that we've kind of discussed off air already with or reached out to. But maybe if any cousins that want it, Stephen, that are not getting a signed edition, how can they get their own copy of the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine?
Mike, the good news is the copies that are not signed that you can buy are going to be worth way more in like 20 years, especially if you get that Arch Manning or Trinidad Chambliss edition. But you can check out, I found some at Publix last week. So Publix looks like one of the best places to pick them up. Also, believe Walmart, Kroger should have some as well, CVS, kind of like your drugstores. But honestly, Mike, the best place is if you can't make it to a bookstore, you can't make it to Publix, just go to our website, athlonsports.com. At the very top, there's a link that says magazines. You click that, takes you to our store. You can order whatever cover that you want. So if you're an Oklahoma fan living in Maine, you can get the John Mateer cover. If you're like Cousin Shane and you can't find maybe the Tennessee cover and you're only seeing South Carolina, we can ship you that Tennessee cover. So that's the best place to get it, athlonsports.com.
All right, I appreciate that, Stephen, and we'll put a link in the show notes for all the cousins to find to order their own magazine if they can't find it as well. So again, we're going to be breaking down the official predictions for each and every SEC team according to Athlon Sports with Stephen here on this episode. Before we do that, though, I wanted to ask Stephen a couple things, kind of news items around the SEC. Like I said, it's been a little while since we had Stephen on the show. But I also want to make an announcement, Stephen, which goes with this show, but it also goes with the podcast. So we're bringing back the Fall Camp Preview Series starting next week. So we're going to, Shane and I, deep dives on each and every SEC team. If you're new, maybe you missed it last year or you just weren't a listener of the show yet, where have you been? But if you're new, so basically it's an entire show dedicated to the upcoming season. We just do one team, full show, and we're bringing that back. I think this is the third or fourth year that we've done this. So the way we're going to do it, though, this year, a little bit different. Whoever the largest donor is this week, any time during the entire week of the show, your team will be the first team featured on the Fall Camp Preview Series. The second highest donation, that'll be the second team we cover. And third team, we only do 3 a week. So top 3 donations of the week, we're going to do those teams in that order. So again, not something you're required to do, but if you want to see your team featured on the Fall Camp Preview Series with Shane and I, throw us a bone, and hey, we'll throw you an exclusive Fall Camp series just for you. And also, same as always, if you want to throw us a donation here with Stephen, we will get to your team and we'll spend extra time on them as we're going to hit on all 16 SEC teams on this episode. But before we jump into that, Stephen, anything stand out to you from last week from the SEC spring meetings?
Michael, we'll start with something that's not very controversial. Let's start with the cupcake weekend going away. It's a good thing for the SEC just because like when we got to that November weekend, the schedule was so thin on like SEC versus SEC matchups. So that's a win. And the reality is like these matchups, instead of being clustered on one weekend, they just get dispersed to the rest of the season. It is kind of funny for the rest of the college football to pick on the SEC when you can go look at like who Michigan or some of these other teams were playing early in the year while the SEC was playing hard games. But I think that's a win for fans. It is going to, and it's only, talks about like strength of schedule. We've talked about 9 SEC games this season, like in the future, not having like a little bit of a breather before you get to a rivalry game or the stretch, it's only going to make that harder. So I think the SEC got it right, Mike, by dispersing those games to other weekends. Don't you think?
Oh, I think so. It's been a little bit of a black eye on the Southeastern Conference over the years, having this freaking cupcake weekend. So I think it's good, and I think it'll have more competitive football late in the year. I also think we will perhaps this could help. Sometimes, Stephen, where like we have it honestly, it hasn't happened a ton here lately, but it happened all the time with divisions where we would have. Like in early November, we'd already have the SEC championship kind of locked up. I think moving this weekend will kind of prevent things of that nature and playoff spots being locked up a little bit earlier. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, I think it's just going to add more drama to the stretch run because, if you think about the last like weekend this year, I think was it Tennessee and Florida was probably like the primetime game that week. I mean, in the past, that probably would have been a marquee game to have on a Saturday night, but it was not the kind of the case this year, or certainly with the last couple of years. But I think, if you're adding more drama to late the season, and in college football, not trying to like manufacture drama, but if you're adding games of more importance later in the season, it's going to only kind of increase the drama around who could be in the mix to make the conference championship. Like you said, when we had divisions, it was a lot more like settled, like once you kind of got to this point of the season. But now I think you're opening up the path a little bit. You're adding a little bit of excitement for fans. And especially if you have some marquee matchups before you go into that rivalry weekend, you got the conference championship right after that. So I love it all around. I just think kind of spicing up the late schedule, making the conference title race more important. There's some games of playoff positioning that are probably going to be super important. Who knows? I mean, Heisman, coaching, ton at stake always in November, and probably even more so now.
Well, we appreciate Stephen. Man, we got some donations flying in here. Appreciate you. Simply, he gave us 10 memberships or gifted 10 memberships. Shout out Simply Tech. So right now, Stephen, the first fall camp preview series is going to be Texas, unless somebody can beat it. That's Stephen Up. Shout out Stephen Up. We love all Stevens on this show.
Always showing up for them boys in Tuscaloosa. It's Stephen Up. Roll Tide.
Thank you, Stephen Up. Not showing a preference, just glad to see Lassan back. Thanks for sharing your football braid with us. Appreciate you, Stephen Up. So Alabama, you're on deck right now. And Cousin Glenn Warsaw, appreciate you, buddy. Boomer Soomer. I prefer weaker non-conference games to be early in the season. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? You kind of want the easy games right out the gate, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it gives you a chance, especially if you have a team, and especially in this era of college football where there's so many roster changes. We've got all the 30 plus coaching changes this year. It is nice to have those games to kind of work through some of like the early season hiccups. So I could totally see why it's valuable from that perspective. Also, Mike, I would note, I think there's a very big picture kind of argument that's kind of going on right now in some of the other conferences that if we go to this 2014 playoff, that they may increase it to 10 conference games. And you've also seen some schedule proposals about how maybe there'd be 2 off weeks during the season. So you could kind of spread out the action a little bit more. If the season starts a little earlier, you got an extra bye week. An extra bye week probably helps with the grind of the SEC. You're not having like hard, 5-star matchup after 5-star matchup. You don't get the cupcake game anymore. It's earlier, but you got the extra bye week. So there's a lot of variables in scheduling. I just think overall, not having a bunch of games against FCS opponents is good for fans. It may not be great for coaches, but it's great for us as fans, and certainly gives us better games to watch that weekend.
Were you at all surprised Lane Kiffin didn't run his mouth down at SEC spring meetings?
A little bit. I thought, when somebody finally maybe maybe got to him, told him like, hey, let's try to go 1 week without a controversy, right? I thought maybe Mike Elko and Eli Drinkowitz had two of the better performances. I loved Eli Drinkowitz on Feinbaum, man. I was having a good time watching him on Feinbaum last week. I thought Mike Elko, just from like understanding sort of like the big picture things with the playoff and just kind of where the sport is, I thought he was fantastic. I was ready to run to like a voting booth and vote for him as like college football commissioner last week.
Yes, indeed. Isn't it weird to think about, Stephen, though, that as of today, if we're talking just at their current jobs, Drink is the second most tenured Southeastern Conference coach. The only one that beats him right now is Kirby, I believe.
Man, I think this could be a year where Drinkowitz has a chance to get a lot of national respect too. You know, with all the turnover this team has, with the uncertainty surrounding Ahmad Hardy, the Austin Simmons coming in, transferring. So I think you just look at the last 3 years, the double-digit wins. I know maybe not getting into the playoff was a little bit of a disappointment considering the schedule, but man, I mean, I've been doing some like sketching out of my coach rankings and having him as like a top half of the SEC head coach. It's not really surprising, given kind of like the longevity, like you mentioned, with all the changes, but also the success that he's had. And I do think that I think there's a chance that he may get some national respect this year if they can reload, maybe like I think.
Right. And, you know, they're not going to give you points for sticking around necessarily, but I just the fact that it shows he got hired in 2020, right? That was his first season. And we're in 26, and he's the second longest tenured at his current job. It just goes to show you how ridiculously difficult and how much of a grind this conference can be on all these coaches.
100%. I mean, 30 something coaching changes nationally from last year, and we've got a handful of them in the SEC this year. We'll see how this year plays out. It may not be a super like active coaching carousel in the SEC, but I think kind of in general, I mean, if you just look at the sort of when a lot of these guys in college football, their tenure started, and you see the turnover, like, you know, guys like Kirk Ferentz and at Iowa, Troy Calhoun at Air Force, like those guys aren't the guys that are sticking around. It's the guys that are there, like it stops for 4 or 5 years and either you're fired or you're moving on. So if you're sticking around at a place, I think that says a lot about the job you're doing. Also says a lot about the craziness of the coaching carousel. And I mean, Mike, who knows, depending on what kind of jobs come open, I suspect Drinkowitz's name will always come up if Missouri keeps winning for some of these other jobs that could be out there this offseason.
Well, you hush up with that, Stephen, because P5 just gave us $50 to talk some Missouri football. MIZ, cousins always love a Lassan show. So right now, Mizzou is on deck to be the first fall camp preview series. We appreciate you, P5. We got Texas, thanks to Simply and Stephen Up, Alabama. So those are our three for next week, unless anyone can beat it. So let's dive into it, Stephen. The Athlon Sports official SEC predictions, and thanks to P5. Let's start with Missouri. So we're just going to go in random order here, based on donations. Can you break down where Missouri ranks in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview? And I'm just going to sit back as you take the blows here.
I was going to say, I should have wore like a helmet or something for tonight's show. I feel like I'm going to take a lot of heat, but that's okay. Let's talk it out tonight. I've got Missouri 11th in the SEC, 29th nationally. I think Missouri is essentially a top 25 team. You know, I talk about this a lot. I think when we think about rankings, essentially these teams are clustered into tiers, and there's not a ton of difference, you know, between 18 and 30 or so. You're talking about maybe a game or two. So my power rankings ended up with Missouri at 29, essentially a top 25 team. I mentioned it earlier, Mike, but I do think this is a chance for Missouri to get some national respect. You've got a quarterback in Austin Simmons with enormous upside. He hasn't quite reached that potential, but what if he does? What if they take this 0 returning starters on defense and reload quickly, and the defense is one of the best in the SEC? You combine those two things, and Missouri's got something, because we've got a good track record on defense under Corey Batoon, and then offensively, if they can take a step forward. Obviously, there is a massive question about Ahmad Hardy. I think Jamal Roberts could be just fine as the first running back. But again, that puts a lot of pressure on Austin Simmons to take that step forward. Couple things that worried me was just wondering, how big of a step forward does Austin Simmons take this year? And then, of course, on the defensive side of the ball, total reload. But I'm also kind of worried about the secondary, especially at corner. Chris Graves transferring in from Ole Miss was huge because he's got SEC experience, but I still am worried about that spot. So, Mike, I trust Drinkowitz. I trust Batoon to reload, but I still think that puts them in that 20 to 30 range outside the playoff, but essentially a top 25 team at number 29 nationally.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that just goes to show the crazy depth of this conference. Again, not even currently, according to Steven, not me. Yell at Steven. But I didn't even say I disagreed. But outside the top 10 in the conference, yet borderline top 25, right outside it. Man, but again, you flip a game here or there, and we're talking, top 25 for sure, and perhaps in the playoff conversation for much of the season. How thin is that line, basically, from being in that? Again, if you got an 11th in the conference, remember now we got 16, so 8th or higher. I mean, realistically, how many games are we talking that Missouri may need to flip? Does that make sense? Like maybe one where they're projected to lose, but if they win one or two, that they could be a top half SEC team.
Mike, I think this year with the 9-game SEC schedule, and this was one of the things that showed up at the SEC spring meetings, is how the playoff committee is actually assessing, strength of schedule, especially in the SEC. I hope that 9-3 teams are squarely in the mix to make the playoff because they deserve it based upon the strength of schedule if it plays out that way in the SEC. So really you're talking about finding a way to go from like an 8-4 to 9-3 or 10-2. And I think one of the things when I was studying this Missouri schedule that jumped out to me is like there's an opportunity to get off to a really fast start again because you should be favored at least in your first 3 games. At Mississippi State will be tricky because I think Mississippi State is better. You get Florida at home, you get Texas A&M at home, and then later in the season, you get Oklahoma at home in the last game of the regular season. So there's some high-profile conference games at home that Missouri has a chance to pull off maybe an upset. And if you can do that, instead of being 29th, win 1 or 2 of those, and you're talking about finishing probably securely in the top 15, 9-3, 10-2 type of range. So I think some of those home games is where I would watch for Missouri. If they can pick off an upset, then all of a sudden we're changing the trajectory of this season.
All right. And then you kind of hit on this, but, and again, you got to remember, Steven's putting in all this work in the magazine, and then, I mean, it's not funny, but right as the magazine's coming out, it's, oh man, star player, best player involved in a shooting. Yeah. How much does that potentially change the outlook for Missouri, if at all? Maybe it doesn't, but again, I believe this is the nation's leading returning rusher. If he's not out there or he's misses a significant portion, how much does that potentially change the fortunes of the Tigers?
Mike, I think Ahmad Hardy's the best running back coming back in college football. And if he's not out there for the bulk of the SEC season, if he's not out there early in the year, I'm not as worried about it because you're playing Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kansas, and Troy. But I think we mentioned those home games. Like I think you want him out there for, Florida, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. I think he's worth a couple points like in the evaluation. If I knew that this had happened in April and there was the uncertainty around his status, I might have moved Missouri back a spot or two nationally. But I do think there are a lot of factors that would say, don't move them too far because you have someone like Jamal Roberts. I think Austin Simmons is going to take that step forward, maybe not to break out all SEC, but I think he's going to have a good year. And there's kind of like this trust factor I've kind of mentioned too. Like I trust Drinkowitz and Batoon to reload enough to keep them in the top 25 conversation. So while he's probably worth a couple points, I don't know that it would have taken them from 29th to 40th. We might be talking about a spot or two nationally, but I still would probably have them 11th in the SEC.
Mm-hmm. I like this comment from Mike Andrews. Hardy's a beast, but only 50 yards versus OU. They need a passing game. Thoughts on, you kind of already mentioned Austin Simmons, but the fact that Missouri has, I would say, largely underperformed overall. Again, we're talking one of the top half teams in the conference, though. So there's a lot of teams that would trade their records in recent years for Missouri. But the fact that they've been able to do this with no offense to Bo Prabula and Brady Cook, who I think Brady Cook was a fine player, but he was obviously injured his final year there, which really I think affected things. What's your confidence level, maybe on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, that Missouri can have a potent passing attack with first-year quarterback Austin Simmons?
I think Missouri was last in the SEC last year in passing production, like just on yardage. And sometimes that's not the best indicator of success for a lot of reasons. I would say it's probably pretty high. I mean, I think there's a ton of talent to work with Austin Simmons. The question is, like, what is the ceiling and like what is the floor? And I think just in the big picture, Mike, I think if you think about it, like just from a stats perspective, I think you have to assume like the defense is going to come back a little bit, but how far does the offense come up to sort of offset some of those things? I think that's kind of like where do those two things meet is probably where you believe Missouri falls in the SEC. But I think to kind of look at it from a confidence perspective, I would probably rate it pretty high. Like, I think it's got to be a 7 or 8 that they'll be better just based upon that they were last in the SEC. They've got a quarterback with enormous upside, and I like what they did in the portal to reload at receiver, plus some of the guys that they have coming back. So, yes, Ahmad Hardy, if he does not play, is a massive loss, but I think Missouri can do some other things to make up for that production.
So basically, as long as Drink didn't hire Hugh Freeze as an offensive analyst, I mean, things can't get worse, is what you're saying.
That is correct. Yes. Or Bush Hamden, perhaps coming back to call plays. I think, Chip Lindsey's not my favorite hire, but I also get why that they made this move. It feels like there's a pretty solid floor. He's got a pretty long track record of working with quarterbacks and passing games. So I'll trust Drinkowitz. It's not one of my favorite ones, but it's better than hiring Bush Hamden or Hugh Freeze at this point.
All right, so shout out Sipley. We appreciate you, buddy. You gifted 10 memberships, Steven. So I want to shout out Hobby Hangout, Keg 2071, Ken, Dakota, Vol for Life 62, Jason, whoever, cool name, Southern Sunshine, Chance Green, Georgia Girl, and Sam Shepard. Welcome to
the family.
Yeah, thank you, Sipley, for the donation. So we get to Steven's favorite here. Texas. Let's talk some Texas football, Steven. Where does Athlon have Texas? Mighty Texas in the SEC this year.
All right, Mike, here it is. Texas, number 3 nationally, number 2 in the SEC. And I wrestled with this, and there's one other prediction that we'll get to in a little bit that kept me up almost an entire night. This was the second one. Texas versus Georgia for first place in the SEC. It was a source of a lot of consternation and a lot of sweating for me to try to sort this out. So I mentioned this a couple times, Mike, this offseason. I don't think there's much separation among the top 7 teams in the country. I think Georgia, I think Texas, I think Notre Dame, Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana. They were all really close for that number 1 spot. I think those are 7 kind of breaking away from the pack this year. So I think for Texas, the key thing is, can they handle expectations better and have they learned from the mistakes from last season? And I think they've learned from the mistakes by Sarkisian was aggressive in the portal to fix the offensive line, starters, and depth. So that group is in better shape this year. Arch played a lot better in late October, November, in December bowl game. So he's trending up, and now you've given him more weapons. You've given him a Cam Coleman that can stretch the field. You've got Raleek Brown. You've got Hollywood Smothers. I love the 1-2 like thunder and lightning that they can bring to that backfield. Also taking a big swing on defense. I don't think Pete Kwiatkowski was necessarily the problem there, but I also understand, hey, Georgia's the standard. Let's go take a branch off Georgia and let's try to improve this defense to another level. And Will Muschamp has no shortage of talent to work with. So that's kind of the theme again, Mike, is there is no shortage of talent at Texas. Can they meet expectations? Have they learned from last year's mistakes? I think Arch Manning continues that kind of trajectory, and I think Texas is squarely in the mix to win the national title this year.
How confident are you in the offensive line after last season's, again, debacle is a strong word, but if that unit held up their end of the bargain, Texas would have made the playoff. But of course, we know they just missed it.
Mike, I'm pretty confident in this group. I think it could be a top 10 group nationally. I think it could be one of the better groups in the SEC. That is a projection too. I should say it's not based upon what we saw last year. It's based upon what I think can happen this year. You've got somebody in Trevor Gooseby at left tackle who's probably going to be a high NFL draft pick. Connor Robertson settled in at center down the stretch. You've upgraded your depth on the interior and on the outside. If Brandon Baker settles in at guard, Melvin Ciani's your answer at right tackle, your offensive line is significantly better than it was last season. And maybe there's also the comfort factor for Arch Manning too of being a second-year starter, because I did feel like at times when we saw him press, it was almost trying to do too much. Maybe it was all the pressure of being a first-time starter. This year, we saw it in November and in the bowl game against Michigan. If he just goes out there, lets it go, plays free, I mean, that's kind of like the number one pick type stuff that I think a lot of us thought we would see last season. So maybe this year too, being able to trust your offensive line helps Manning take a step forward too as a passer. And there's also maybe a little bit of familiarity now as a second-year starter. He can help that group by getting right protections and things like that too.
How important do you think is that Ohio State game after last season opening at Ohio State? So much hype around that game, and it was largely a dud. I mean, I don't know how you would describe it, Stephen, but I mean, it just was not very entertaining football. Again, maybe they're just two really good defenses, I think you could say. But again, that game was not that entertaining from what I recall. And then if you recall, I mean, it was like the next several weeks, it just seemed like Texas felt like something was wrong with them. Is there any danger of that happening again? Or do you think that is more with the Arch Manning, like you said, first time, too much pressure, and he caught fire at the end? No Texas fan is going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, we're losing Ohio State. But are we hitting the panic button, I guess is what I'm really asking, if we lose this year at home to Ohio State?
Mike, I think the good thing is it's in week 2. You get Texas State, unless you decide to take Texas Tech's offer to play in week 1. You get the Bobcats, and of course with Texas State's defense, Texas should be able to kind of run it as, do whatever they need in the first game to kind of knock off some of the offseason rust. So you have one game to get going, but also, and maybe I'm crazy, and Mike, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, I think a lot of that game was Ohio State's defense was really good. It just like Sonny Styles, like Caleb Downs. We could just go on and like watch the NFL draft and see how many guys off that defense were picked. And Matt Patricia did a great job last year for Ohio State's defense. They threw a lot of stuff at Texas in the first game of the season, NFL DC and all this talent and all the expectations and pressure. I totally understand why Texas struggled in that game. And I think this year is going to be different, especially with the game in Austin and the losses that Ohio State has on defense. But I do think it's worth considering that, if you're Texas, this Ohio State game and why it's important, you have to go to Tennessee, you get Oklahoma, and oh, by the way, you still have to play Ole Miss, LSU, and Texas A&M. I think at 9-3, Texas team gets into the playoff. But Mike, we've seen it. I mean, these teams, if you suffer an early loss or two, what does it do to a team that can they stay together? Can they get hot like Oklahoma did last season to kind of finish the job down the stretch? I mean, early losses could add up, and you start adding 2 or 3 and you fall out of the playoff mix. Who knows where this team goes? I don't think that happens with Texas, but I think getting revenge in that second game of the year is important to get off to a good start.
Hey, shout out Simply Texas. Stephen, he gave us a donation here. More interested to see what Texas does with the new defensive coordinator this year. I trust the offense. Do you trust the offense? I mean, I already know you do, but tell us why you do.
I think it is the combination of Arch Manning in his second year taking a step forward, plus the portal additions. And I know there is a ton of pressure on Cam Coleman, but Mike, I think if you just watch the way that Cam Coleman played at Auburn and what he could unlock for Arch Manning, like his ability to stretch the field. Maybe he's in Texas had a lot of inconsistency with drops last year. Arch put the ball right into the hands of receivers. They drop it. I think Cam Coleman solved some of that, but also I think the offensive line is much improved. Like it's improved from having a year of experience, but also portal additions, internal growth. I think they learned last year's lesson. This group is deeper. I think it's better across the board. So I like the offense for Texas to meet its potential. And Mike, on defense too, guys like Rasheem Biles that transferred in from Pitt, the linebacker, Bo Masco, the Rutgers transfer, those guys are going to be impact day one type additions. So I like what Texas has personnel-wise on both sides of the ball. Probably the only hesitation about picking them one, the conference has been going through Athens the last couple of years. That's probably why Georgia's won over Texas.
Yeah, and I think Nolo has figured you out. He says, thank you, Stephen. I see what you did there. Keep at number 1 away. Hook up.
Maybe I am curious about this, and I'm going to have to ask some people in the magazine and elsewhere in the industry is, did Texas being number 1 scar you from picking them number 1 again this year? Do you think that might scare some people away?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the hype is going to come for Texas. I think it's just written in stone. They have to be hyped. More often than not, I think they're overhyped, but that doesn't mean that they don't have all the pieces to win it all either.
I think they do. I think if there is a question, I think it would be like the schedule early takes a toll. If you lose to Ohio State, if you lose to Oklahoma, you're already like -2. Can you run the table the rest of the way? I like the offensive line. What if it doesn't reach its potential? What if Will Muschamp doesn't make a difference on defense? There are questions, but they feel like small questions compared to last season when we came into the year talking about the offensive line, not enough. But this year it doesn't feel like there's a glaring weakness with this team.
Well, let me ask you this. You are far from a hot take artist, and I'm not even asking for a hot take, but I'm just kind of curious. What do you honestly think happens to Steve Sarkisian if Texas misses the playoff?
If they miss the playoff and it's like 9-3, I think it's hard to see like a coaching change or anything like that. I think massive underachieving isn't anything on the table at that point. It seems crazy to say it, right?
We're just going to keep running it back at 9-3. Okay. No, I mean, I think that's fair, but I don't know. I don't know if you can. I don't know if you bring a guy back if you got 2 years of Arch and you don't make it.
If Texas doesn't make the playoff with Arch Manning, they didn't make it last year. They don't make it this year. And let's just say there's not there's no unfortunate injury or anything crazy happening like that. Would that not be one of the most like mismanagements or like biggest misses of like not capitalizing on talent in like the last, 10 years or so in college football?
Yeah, without a doubt.
No.
I just wanted to hear you say it because I just didn't know. I didn't know if those words could come out of your mouth, Stephen.
If Texas underachieves massively, Mike, I will be probably one of the first ones on this show saying I think there might be time for a coaching change or something drastic there.
But in all seriousness, how in the world is anybody going to cover Cam Coleman and Ryan Wingo at the? I mean, that seems That seems like a very, very difficult task. And then I know they get the running backs. I was kind of blown away because I'm going through the returning production. How few rushing yards Texas returns. Now you could just say, well, they've upgraded via the portal. They say that every year down at Texas. We just upgraded. That's what we did. But I think what gets lost in that is you could have perfect coverage, and then Arch Manning's just going to take off on you because he's a really good runner. So, yeah, they are going to be hard as hell to stop, I would think, for every defense.
Also, Emmett Mosley, he missed some time last year due to injury. He's having a full season of him. There was also spring buzz about Jermaine Bishop, and Lockett in there as well. They got a lot of weapons on that offense. If this offense is not, one of the top, insert whatever number, it'd be a massive underachievement this year, just given the weapons and the way that Arch Manning played at the end of last season.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, for Stephen Up. Appreciate your donation, sir. Let's talk some Alabama Crimson Tide. Where do you got Alabama in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine?
Shout out to Stephen Up. I always appreciate him hanging out with us each show too, Mike. I've got Alabama at 15th nationally. I've got him 7th in the SEC. I think there's one thing that jumps out to me about this Alabama team is the schedule. I think the schedule's pretty favorable for a run at the college football playoff. Also, I am going to bank on Keelan Russell being a star this year. I know the Austin Mack, Keelan Russell quarterback battle may go into the fall. I think Keelan Russell is going to be the guy, and I think he's going to be a star for this Alabama team. You add in a motivated Ryan Coleman-Williams, plus Brooks, plus Noah Rogers when he's healthy with some of the other receivers that Alabama has. This group is loaded. Defensively, I like the transfers that they brought in to solidify the defensive front and linebackers. Throw in Yanze Pierre coming off the edge. Secondary is loaded. I think this is a top 5 secondary in college football. My biggest concern is the same thing we've touched on a couple times this offseason, Mike. It is just the offensive line and physicality and the rushing attack. A lot of these pieces to me say, Alabama might be a little bit underrated, as funny as it is to say, if the quarterback play is as good as I think it can be. I don't know the offensive line and rushing attack is going to get there. I think it could be better by default, especially if Crowell lives up to the hype. I'm just not sold on the offensive line right now. And I think that if you look at their schedule and the way it sets up, they have a very favorable early and a very favorable late. So if you can kind of navigate the front and the back half of the schedule, you get to Georgia, Tennessee, A&M, LSU, at Vanderbilt in the middle of the schedule. Feels like that stretch is probably going to decide whether or not this team makes the playoff this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, it's so funny, Stephen. This time last year, all the Tide fans, man, this Ryan Grubb, he's going to save us. Now I think they're like, how do we get rid of this Ryan Grubb? And I don't think he was that bad. I mean, heck, they developed their quarterback into a first-round pick. But I think they're blaming him for the lack of physicality and the getting too cute on 3rd and 4th down. But I don't know. I think that's probably Grubb and DeBoer understanding the talent they have to work with and understanding that they just can't, at least not yet, match the physicality on the line of scrimmage. And I don't know how that gets solved with blowing up the entire unit. Well, not blowing it up, but I mean, guys graduating, new offensive line coach. I mean, maybe the new offensive line coach, I guess, brings that, but I don't know. That is the question, I think, with Alabama.
A lot. It is very hard to turn over an offensive line in one offseason and mostly via the portal. I know Alabama's got some guys that were on the roster last year, like a Michael Carroll, some other players they hope to develop. But you take away Parker Brailsford, take away Caden Proctor, like those guys were good players, and now you're expecting essentially 5 new starters to step in and hope that this group improves. I think it's asking a lot. And also I think just from, the talent in the running back room, I think like Jam Miller was solid. He also got hurt, and that kind of hindered the maybe run game at times. Crowell is going to have to maybe make up for some of that offensive line play. Like he's going to have to be good enough to maybe break some tackles, break some long runs. So I think there's an upgrade coming from Crowell if he's as good as maybe the high school hype is, but also Mike, he's going to have to be good enough to maybe overcome some of these offensive line issues early. So I think this team's probably going to have to lean on Russell or Mac early in defense until some of these things come along. I'm just not sold the offensive line gets there this year, which is why I didn't pick them to make the playoff.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you, Stephen, which is more likely? And I'm not saying either one of these is where the season will land for Alabama, but what is more likely? Let's say making, I don't know, the Final Four or higher, or missing a bowl game. So basically, I'm asking you: could this team hit its absolute ceiling, or could it blow up? What is more likely, do you think?
It's funny you asked this question because when I was going through the predictions, one of the notes that I made myself, and I looked at the schedule, I said, "Where is the weird loss for this Alabama team?" We saw this last year with Florida State. The year before it was Vanderbilt. So I just kind of went down and was thinking like, okay, early in the season at Kentucky, there's Mississippi State before Georgia. There could be a couple landmines on this schedule. I think to answer your question, Mike, I know you'll love my answer. I actually think that the more likely scenario is a run in the playoff because I think there's a world where good quarterback play helps Alabama, or I should say great quarterback play helps them overcome some of these issues. And I still think they're going to be pretty solid on defense. How far does Keelan Russell develop? What do they get out of the offensive line? If Russell's great, I think they make the playoff and maybe they win a game or two because he can get hot. And by then, maybe you fix some of your offensive line issues.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's why they pay you the big bucks, Stephen, for answers like that. You know what?
I try to bring a dose of honesty. I'm sure I'm going to take some heat tonight. I'm trying to just give you the positives for every team here.
Well, shout out Cousin Glenn. We appreciated your donation. Let's talk Oklahoma. Where do you got the Sooners, Stephen?
I think Cousin Glenn is going to be very, very happy. I like Oklahoma a lot this year, Mike. I've got Oklahoma third in the SEC and eighth nationally. What a difference a year makes, right? Like, boy, sitting here last year thinking, man, Brent Venables is on the hot seat. We have no idea where this is going. And they made the playoff. They got hot at the right time. They put the pieces together. They made the timely plays, you name it. Now, I think this team is positioned for a deep run potentially in the playoff if the pieces continue to grow. I think they're going to be fine on defense. I trust Brent Venables. Depth is maybe a concern here or there. I like their defensive line, linebackers, and defensive backs all among the top 10 nationally at their position. So I trust Brent Venables to keep this defense near the top of the SEC and in college football. The reason why I like Oklahoma to be a top 10 team again is I think this offense is going to grow. And John Mateer is back for his second year. Offensive line seems poised to me to take a step forward, plus what they have at receiver. Biggest question for me is, can you run the ball a little bit better and take some of that pressure off of Mateer? And that's where I think better offensive line, improved tight end room, healthy John Mateer. I think all that adds up to an improved Oklahoma team this year in the national rankings and getting back to the playoff.
Well, let me put you on the spot, Stephen, because I literally just thought of this question right now. Is there a quarterback in the SEC that is poised to take a bigger jump in year two than John Mateer? And I'm not saying, is he better than guys in their year two, like maybe a Trinidad or an Arch? I'm saying, or Gunnar Stockton, you could throw into that. There's probably others, but is there a guy poised to take a bigger jump than John Mateer as a second-year starting quarterback in this conference?
I would buy that. I would buy that from experience. I think having a hopefully healthy season through the SEC benefits him significantly. Also, I think we kind of talked about the supporting cast. I think he's got a much better supporting cast. We heard all the spring too of like maybe trying to tweak the mechanics a little bit. You don't want John Mateer to go away from what works, but you also need him to be able to see and execute in the passing game a little bit better. You don't want to take away the playmaker ability, but you want a little bit higher play overall. And that's kind of where having extra help, so it's not all on John Mateer, better run game, better offensive line. To me, I think all this spells that Mateer is going to take a big step forward this year in the SEC. Maybe not first team all SEC, but I think we'll see a much better version of him and the Oklahoma offense this year.
Right. And I think that that's believable given that the additions they've made at tight end, receiver, in another year with a lot of these offensive linemen, and they've added some players on the offensive line as well. So I don't know. I just think the unit overall is going to be significantly better. And given what you said and what we all know about Brent Venables and that defense, it's not like we need him to be 2019 LSU on offense. You know, we need a far more competent, balanced offense, but we don't need him to be the best in the conference or anything.
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable to suggest that this defense could take like a small step back, like on the stat sheet, just because like maybe they're not as strong depth-wise here or here. I'm not talking like a touchdown a game. I'm just talking just a little bit. Like it's hard to be as good as they were on defense last year. So maybe they're not as good or stout as, on defense, but the offense picks up the slack. So maybe you're just giving up, 3 or 4 more points a game, but the offense is significantly better. You're scoring a touchdown or 8, 9, 10 more points a game. So if you give up a little bit on defense, but your offense is even better, I mean, that puts Oklahoma in a much better spot this season.
Mm-hmm. Now, if they can't run the football, whoa, then what happens?
I got concerns because you look at that early season schedule, at Michigan. I think this Michigan defense is also going to be one of the better defenses in the country. That is a massive non-conference showdown, and really the playoff hopes of both teams could be shaped by that game. You also get Georgia and Texas in the first half of the season. So there is no time, no long runway for Oklahoma to kind of get a gauge of where its rushing attack issues are. But maybe the upside is you play 3 pretty good defenses in the first half of the season, and you're going to find out just how good you are.
Mm-hmm. Just playing a little devil's advocate there for you, Steven. I hope you don't mind that.
Hey, this is the same thing that I go through when I do these rankings for the magazine. Is I'm always like, okay, what if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? So, I think that kind of sums it up, though, doesn't it? For Oklahoma, there's the potential to be better than last year, but it's almost like if they have the same production in the run game, they probably are out of the top 10. They're probably out of the playoff, right? I think they've got to get better production this year. I don't think they can rely on the same formula as last year to get back there.
Yeah, and now you would know better than I because you're more knowledgeable on these other teams, and you're a sicko, so you probably watched like all the Washington State games over the years. But based on what I've seen from Ben Arbuckle, I mean, there is a reality where he's just like way in over his head and he's a complete bust for Oklahoma. Yeah, I think that'll reveal itself this year. And again, maybe that's a little bit too strong, but maybe just not a competent, really good SEC offensive coordinator. There's a reality where that's the case too, wouldn't you? That's out there, don't you think?
I think what I saw last year was a coordinator with a good plan for the most part, who didn't really have the right pieces. I think to answer your question though, if you wanted to make that argument, you could say 2024 Washington State played a Mountain West schedule and they weren't really challenged. And now you're going up against the SEC. Like that gulf between defenses that you're playing is so wide. And last year, like, yeah, there were all these things that went wrong, but maybe there's an underlying problem that we're not seeing in terms of like schematics and coordinator because of some of these other things. So yeah, I think that that's a world that could exist. I'm also just going to bank on like some of the things that I saw from a play calling schematic standpoint that tells me there's something pretty good here. They were just so shorthanded personnel wise and injuries that's why they struggled. And this year, with a more experienced group, they're going to take that step forward.
Yeah, and again, shout out to the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine, but the anonymous comments you shared with us, Stephen, that I thought that was probably the most interesting one of any of the SEC was just the anonymous comment that they really like the Arbuckle offense and he's got answers for everything. And it's really easy to that's kind of eyebrow raising because you're like, what? Did you watch him? But again, he's not saying they're like whooping everybody's ass and they can't be stopped. He likes the scheme. And I don't care if you're Steve Spurrier. If you don't have an offensive line, if you don't have guys that can make plays, if you have literally nothing at tight end, that again, I don't know where those guys are, but I know they're not in the SEC anymore, and I would wager they're not in power football if they're still playing. It just doesn't matter. It's not going to work if you don't have the players. So we're at excuses. I'm not making excuses for the guy, but if it doesn't work this year, then he's got to go. But now that he's got some weapons, maybe that'll show itself that he does have answers for everything. That to me is kind of fascinating when I think of the Sooners.
It really is. And I think 2 years into his tenure as coordinator, counting at the end of this year, like if we're sitting in December and Oklahoma's offense didn't get any better, then I think the verdict is in, because you did take those steps offensively to improve through the portal, through recruiting, absent just some like crazy injuries. So I think in a world where I love the coach scouting because I love the peek behind the curtain that opposing coaches may have scouted and they saw something they liked schematically. I think back to the culture reference for Texas A&M 2 years ago, like opposing coaches pointing out and saying like, hey, maybe the wins and losses aren't there yet. The wins aren't there yet, but the culture was good. We could see where this is going. I think you kind of see it with this is like, they've got the good basics, the good bones of a good offense, but the players just aren't there yet. And given some time with better players and Mateer's healthy this year, you could see it taking off. But if it doesn't, then I think he's going to be on the chopping block at the end of 2026.
Whoa, Stephen, we just had a major donation from Janet. We appreciate you, Janet. I don't know who your team is, so let us know, and we'll jump right on that. But we had a new member, Stephen, so shout out Big Gator fans. So let's do Florida. Where do you have Florida in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine?
Mike, I have Florida at number 9 in the SEC and number 26 nationally. This is a bold prediction maybe on my part. I think this Florida team will be one of the most improved teams in the country. And honestly, I probably could have ranked them a few spots higher, essentially a top 25 team. You might be asking why, and a lot of it is just John Summerall. I just think that John Summerall has won everywhere. I think he's going to get the most out of talent, much better than Billy Napier did. I also love their schedule. Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Oklahoma come to Gainesville. It's a schedule that is made for instant success. Yes, they have a quarterback battle. I think they're going to be fine, whether it's Jones or Philo. Buster Faulkner will find a way to get quality quarterback play. Great skill talent at receiver. Jaden Ball's back. They're going to be fine there. My biggest question is, how far does this offensive line, how far does it come along since the end of spring? That was John Summerall's biggest question. And then how does the defense take a step forward too? Because when I look at this depth chart and I see guys like Jaden Woods, Aaron Childs, LJ McCray, I'm seeing, wow, there's a lot of promising talent here. How fast can they help that core group take the next step? Because I think if they do, they've got the schedule, John Summerall's ability to get the most out of the roster. I think this team could easily finish in the top 25. I've got them 26 right now.
And help us. We got a little confusion here, Stephen. Wait a minute. Ahead of Mizzou in the SEC, but not in the top 25?
Florida was 26 and Missouri was 29.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. But yeah, what are the odds, though, Steve? Let me ask you this. I swear I'm not intentionally being negative on every single one of these. That's not my goal. Yet, I do want to ask, Stephen, because I think we're all guilty of this. When we got a new coach in, guy's undefeated. He could do no wrong, Stephen. I've been singing Summerall's praises since he got before the SEC, right? And last year, I was guilty of hyping up freaking Florida, and I look like an idiot. So the fact that I'm hyping them up again, I guess bet the under on the Gators. But the question is, in all my rambling, Stephen, what are the chances that we are just getting hyped up again? And this is not even Florida related, but just new coach, everything Billy Napier did was wrong. Literally everything, even beating Texas apparently. But everything that he did wrong, Summerall's going to flip it. We're back, baby. How much is that? How much is it? We're just a little maybe overselling the newness and the excitement of this Gator program.
Fair question. I think this is the $1 million question when it comes to college football, because Google him, Kirk Cignetti comes in and takes Indiana to the playoff in year one, national title in year two. There's always a new coach impact somewhere. And I think I am a little scarred by Florida because I was right there with you thinking, man, this team has got all the pieces, they're going to break through, and they didn't. I think the difference is there's a Summerall factor built into this where you see what he did at Troy, you see what he did at Tulane, maximizing that talent each year through a lot of roster changes. And it is significantly harder to win in the SEC than it is the Sun Belt and the American. But also when I look at this team, and I mentioned, I love their skill talent. I love their defensive potential. And then I look at that schedule and go, man, at Auburn early in the year, if they can win that one, they have tricky road trips to Missouri, Kentucky. I think they'll beat Florida State at the end of the year. You get South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss at home, and Ole Miss comes to Gainesville a week after they play LSU. That's a prime. That's got trap game, upset written all over it. This schedule is about as good as it can get for a first-year head coach. So I guess in all my kind of rambling of why I'm believing in Florida, it's really a John Summerall factor. I just think he is a much better coach than Billy Napier, and the schedule allows them to get off to a fast start this year.
Someone just said in the comments, my grandma is a better coach than Billy Napier. So that, that is probably accurate. But yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you, Stephen, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little afraid that we're kind of overrating the Florida Gators. They got the talent. I don't think talent's the issue. Hopefully they've corrected the issues with the coaching staff. And then I did see an article recently. I don't know if this is news to you, Stephen, or you may have already covered it over at Athlon, but I had no idea the salary for Summerall's coaching staff. It's apparently around $12 million this year. And I think it was around 5 last year with their 1,000 people they had on staff. So needless to say, they are, they're paying Faulkner, I think, $3 million. So he's getting a ton. But point being is they are doing everything in their power financially to make this a success. Now, if that was just the key to everything, I think Texas and A&M would win the national championship every year, or in Oregon. But it doesn't quite work that way. But point being, they are setting John Summerall up for success.
100% is. Even I don't know if you saw that article too, Mike. I think it may have been on 24/7 about how they've already made changes to the weight room because of some of the things actually that they had before didn't work out. So it feels like if you could find an edge or two along the margins, especially in this conference where there's going to be a lot of close games, like you do it. And so, yeah, they've set Summerall up for success. They've given him I think one of the better play callers in college football with Buster Faulkner. I know Summerall mentioned, I think at SEC spring meetings, he was working on getting like the NIL and more budget to try to catch up to some of the top teams in the conference. So I think some of those mistakes that Billy Napier made by not hiring an OC, you don't have to worry about that with John Summerall. He's already hired one of the best ones. He's hired a great defensive coordinator. I think he kind of understands his place a little bit better like than Napier. I think he's like Napier may have been way overconfident. I think Summerall's a much better delegator, and also I think he just gets more out of a program, as we saw at Tulane and Troy.
Well, speaking of getting more out of the program, shout out cousin Janet. She's a dog, Steven. So Georgia, let's talk them Bulldogs. Where do you got them? In the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine.
Mike, I mentioned this just a little bit ago. It was a hard decision for me between Texas and Georgia, but the SEC runs through Athens right now. And so I've got Georgia at number 1 in the SEC, and I also have them number 2 nationally. I wrestled with Ohio State versus Georgia for that top spot, ended up picking Ohio State, and we can kind of talk through some of the reasons why Georgia was number 2 and not number 1. Hard to find many glaring flaws for this team outside of the receivers. I think Gunnar Stockton is going to be better in year 2. Defensively, I mean, this team is loaded on defense. I mean, I like Elijah Griffin to break out. You got guys like Gabe Harris, Raylan Wilson, Ellis Robinson, KJ Bold. I mean, we could go on and on. This team is loaded on defense. No doubt about their defense. It is going to be one of, if not the best in college football this season. I am a little bit worried about the receivers, and that's why I did not pick them to win the national title in the magazine. I think Kirby is banking on internal development of some guys, and also Isaiah Cannon, the Georgia Tech receiver. Plus, they've got a lot of like talented tight ends too that they can deploy. I just don't know this group is going to be good enough to get to win the national title. And the reason why I think that as we sit here in early June, all of those teams that I mentioned earlier, like they have like quarterbacks that I think can raise the bar, like CJ Carr at Notre Dame, Dante Moore at Oregon, Darian Mensah at Miami, Josh Hoover potentially at Indiana. I trust Stockton to take that next step forward, but they did not generate enough big plays last year on offense. And now if you take away your best receiver in Zachariah Branch plus some other guys, are you going to be good enough with this group of Georgia receivers? They could develop into that by the end of the year, but I think as we sit here right now, I still have a lot of questions about this group, and that's why they're not number 1 in the country. They're number 2, but I still think this is the team to beat in the SEC.
Do you have any reservations about Mike Bobo and if he's good enough? I mean, at this point, it's almost a joke to me that people still judge the guy because, you know, he's put together some highly efficient offenses, including, I believe, the highest scoring Georgia offense of all time. Now, it's not like he's playing with scrubs either, but, you know, does he hold them back at all? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think Mike Bobo holds Georgia back. If it is, it's not all that much. I think the standard to me, like, is Todd Monken, because Todd Monken was so freaking good that it's almost like if you have Mike Bobo and he's like, you know, a kind of caliber coordinator, like Todd Monken's A+. So that's kind of the standard. He's not quite there. So, I mean, I think he continues to put together productive offenses. We know they can establish the run. I think and this is maybe where Bobo's like could get pass or fail this year. Does Gunnar Stockton take that step forward like we're talking about? And does the offense improve from last year? Because if it doesn't, and Georgia finishes 10-2 and they don't make the SEC championship game, I mean, I think if you're Kirby, I know you've been pretty loyal, but you might have to start thinking about maybe something else and kind of the future of this offense. Like, is Mike Bobo the right guy? I don't think he's holding them back that much, but I think this does kind of feel like a crucial season. Does that seem fair?
Oh yeah, no, I think this is man. Bare minimum, you got to win a playoff game, and I'm not saying Kirby's on any kind of hot seat or something, but he has kind of reached that Nick Saban-esque type run at Alabama, where anything other than a championship, and I'm talking national, seems like a disappointment in Athens. And the fact that they've been unable to win a playoff game that's a tough look. I think the last couple of years. But it's funny you mentioned Monken, because I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but when he was hired, I don't believe that was like universally praised, and everybody's like, "Oh, Todd Monken, way to go!" Some people are like, "What? This is a strange hire," but clearly, Grand Slam hire, and he has come out in multiple interviews since then and said, "Yeah, basically tried to run Stetson Bennett off." So, I mean, again, the guy's a genius, right? Genius offensive mind, and even he didn't believe in Stetson Bennett. So, I say all that to say you never know how any of this stuff's going to work out when you've got, you're the best coordinator you've ever hired trying to run off the quarterback that got you 2 national championships. It's just it's weird how stuff works out. You know what?
Yeah, because if you're Todd Monken and you ran off Stetson Bennett and you don't have good quarterback play, you look like an idiot, right? Georgia was, it looks like 30 in the 30s last year in success rate, 36 nationally in offensive success rate. Kind of feels like that number needs to be a little bit higher for this team to win the national title. They were a little bit lower, surprisingly, on defense last season. But yeah, I think ultimately Mike Bobo and Georgia's national championship hopes rest on, does Gunnar Stockton take that step forward, and what do the receivers do? I think Stockton will be better, and I think we saw this, like that growth that came in the season, making clutch plays and against Tennessee. I know they didn't win the playoff game, but I mean, it's also funny to sit here at the playoff, and I'm sitting here thinking they lost to Notre Dame probably because Carson Beck was hurt in the SEC championship game. And then Trinidad Chambliss had like an out-of-body experience in the Superdome. And it's like those two things are just like crazy circumstances. But yeah, they do need to win a playoff game this year, and they have all the right pieces to do so.
Mm-hmm. Wait, if Georgia doesn't, let's say Georgia underperforms this year. And again, that is, I don't want to say likely, but that's such a tough thing to ask because their expectations are sky high. Let's just say they either fail to win the Southeastern Conference or fail to win the national championship, which is an unfair bar to ask anyone to do. But if that's what happens, would you begin to question at all the fact that Georgia didn't go all in on the portal? Would that be a critique, you think?
If I'm Georgia, I would not go all into the portal. What I would do is maybe be a little bit more strategic about high-level impact guys. Because let's just hypothetically say if they had Cam Coleman right now, I think we're probably picking Georgia to win the national title. I think it's just Georgia has a good formula of internal development, and Kirby's one of the best, if not the best coach in college football. He and Cignetti are right there, number one. They've got the right formula, but I almost wonder if you need to not be afraid to swing a little bit higher to find that missing piece here or there. Their portal class this year is solid, especially in the secondary, but I would have loved to have seen one more higher profile guy at receiver. So maybe that's it, is it feels like they need to tweak that strategy just a little bit.
Yeah, even like Cam Coleman, that's probably the high end, probably the most expensive receiver, but even a guy like Isaiah Horton, I would feel like would have been a massive upgrade for them.
I do too. I was just thinking, like, you put Isaiah Horton or you put like a Jace Brown who's at LSU, like you put another playmaker there, or go out and get two guys kind of the caliber of Isaiah Cannon. And I think we're talking about a much different kind of feeling about this Georgia receiving core coming into the season.
Hey, Steven, shout out Bulldog, Mississippi. He gifted a membership to Sub official YouTube. Sub, welcome to
the family.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for the assist. Thank you, Bulldog, Mississippi. So let's talk them other dogs. Stephen, Mississippi State. Where do you have them finishing in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine?
Mike, I am buying some stock in this Mississippi State team. I have them finishing 13th in the SEC, 44th nationally. So I do think this team takes a step forward. I think it's also going to be tricky because they could be better, and I think they will. I don't know how much it shows up in the win column. This 9-game SEC slate plus a road game at Minnesota in week 2, 6-6 might end up being where they finish, or even 5-7. But I do think this team is better for just 2 reasons. Number one, it's Kamario Taylor. He is one of my top breakout quarterbacks for this season. Jeff Lebby's offense, they are going to put up points, assuming the offensive line holds up. Defensively, I trust Zach Arnett to improve this group. How far? That's kind of the question. Like, if it's drastically better, we're talking about like 7 wins, Mississippi State. If it's just kind of a step forward, we're talking about a team that's probably fighting for bowl eligibility again. Like the fact Kelly Jones is back. I think he's one of the most underrated players nationally in college football. Will Whitson coming back after injury last season too on the defensive front. They've got a lot of nice pieces, plus a massive upgrade at coordinator, plus a breakout quarterback. I think Mississippi State is fighting once again for bowl eligibility, largely because of how tough the schedule is.
If they don't make that massive jump, though, does Jeff Lebby get a 4th year, do you think, at Starkville?
This is a bad and very boring answer to you. I think it depends on the degree of 5-7 or 6-6, right? Like, if you have that sloppy end of game management thing again, and maybe you blow a game or 2, like, I'd be worried that's kind of a trend of a couple years now. If you're really competitive and you're just falling short, I think you could easily see is like what we saw at Florida State, what we saw at Wisconsin is we're going to reinvest more resources in the program to give the coach what he needs to get to a winning record next season. So I think it depends on maybe how they play and what it looks like week to week, as opposed to maybe just a win total.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because last year they were very competitive for much of the season, particularly the first half. You know, what were I believe they went 4-0 in the non-com, right? And then it was like a lot of, I mean, Tennessee, took them to overtime. Florida should have won that one. Man, last year,
too.
Texas, yeah, that was another one, should have won that one. I mean, they could have taken that massive jump, and it's easy to kind of write them off. But man, if they could just close games, get better on defense, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Mississippi State is one of the bigger surprises in the conference, because they seemingly always, under Jeff Lebby, have all these guys on offense that it's like, never even heard of this guy, and he's just he's wide ass open, 3 times a game. Like, where'd they get this guy? Where'd they get that guy? Like, his system, that it leads to opportunities, and they seem to pick these guys off from probably G5 or power, maybe somewhere where it didn't work out for them at a Power 5, yet they do really well at state, and then they move on. I mean, they have an eye for the talent that's going to fit really well in their system. I say all that to say, I mean, I don't think it's that wild to see them as one of the most improved teams in the conference.
I would agree with that. I think what's also interesting about their schedule too is at Minnesota, at South Carolina, Missouri, Alabama. 4 games early in the season that could be kind of toss-up-ish. Alabama coming to Starkville, I think, what is it, a week before Alabama gets Georgia. Perfect timing to catch maybe Alabama thinking ahead. I mean, if you can go on the road and beat Minnesota, and Minnesota's a pretty solid team this year, I mean, that's going to kind of signal good things to come in the SEC. And you mentioned the receivers. I mean, someone like Zion Reagans, who was at Oklahoma and transferred to Mississippi State, might be like the next burner for this offense. Like, they're going to find guys to score points. I think if they want to get to 6 to 7 to 8 wins, they're going to have to make that massive step forward on defense and find a way to close the door in some of these close games that we saw last season.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need we can't have such a uncompetitive Mississippi State. And again, they were not uncompetitive last year, but they were the 2 years before. And that was like one of the most proud programs in the conference, and now they're kind of afterthoughts. We need to get back to them being one of the tougher teams in this conference, I think.
What's the saying that coaches always say? Like, you lose big in year 1, you lose close in year 2, and you win in year 3. Well, after losing close, they're kind of knocking on the door of maybe breaking through this year. And I mentioned the schedule. I mean, you get Auburn, you get Vanderbilt, Alabama, Missouri, all in Starkville. It's a tough place to play. You can kind of knock off Minnesota, pick up a couple upsets. I mean, there's a path right there to Mississippi State easily exceeding our preseason expectations here.
All right, shout out cousin Jared. He gave a donation and he gifted a membership, Steven. So he's a big those crazy Cajuns, man. LSU, Steven. Everybody wants to talk about Lane quitting this offseason. How's his first season going to look down in Baton Rouge?
Mike, I'm not quitting those LSU playoff hopes because I am buying some stock in LSU this preseason. I've got them number 10 nationally. They are my last team in the college football playoff. They are number 5 in my SEC predictions. I am not kidding when I say this. The last prediction that I put in the magazine was 5 and 6 in the SEC and 10 and 11 nationally. I think I spent almost up all night debating this. I think I took a walk and decided to pick one team. Then I changed my mind an hour later. So very indecisive on 5 and 6 in the SEC is what I'm trying to tell you. I think what I like about LSU, we can start with the schedule. I think it's pretty manageable. I know they go to Oxford early in the season, but you get Texas A&M, Texas, and Alabama at your place. You also play Tennessee later in the season on the road. By then, you would figure that Lane Kiffin and his staff have it figured out. I am worried about too high of expectations. Don't love that Lane Kiffin was trying to downplay him a few weeks ago in spring. Didn't really make me feel any better about this. Am worried about Sam Levitt's health too. But I think there's a world where if everything goes according to plan, you have one of the SEC's best defenses with Blake Baker. I trust Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. to sort out this offense as the season goes along. I think they'll be a lot better at running the ball. I think Jordan Seaton, the tackle transfer from Colorado, can solidify the offensive line. So that's kind of the play here is Kiffin's offense, Blake Baker's defense, maybe a loss or two early, but they gain steam as the season progresses, and they're the last team in the college football playoff, and they're my number 10 team nationally.
How easy, and it sounds like you think it'll be kind of easy, is it to essentially, I don't know what the word would be, like poured over a program, a culture, because again, I think it's easy to look at Lane Kiffin and, Portal King, he does this every year. Why can't he'll just do it at LSU, taking all these transfers and putting all the puzzle pieces together. It didn't work immediately at Ole Miss. People forget that. Now again, they weren't like awful, and it was a COVID year and it was all SEC. So that, I mean, they probably would have won, if I recall, maybe like 7 games year one, because I'm including, the non-conference. So I'm not to say it was a failure, but I think when we think of Kiffin now, we think of one of the better program managers, one of the better coaches in the country. Can you just take all that from Oxford put it in Baton Rouge and it's going to work immediately. I mean, I don't know. I seriously question that. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a failure, but I'm just saying it. I don't know that we can do that immediately, but clearly you do. You got them as a playoff. How big of a hurdle will that be, or is it not one at all? Do you think?
I will admit, I don't feel very confident in this pick. I just, to be brutally honest with you, because I am worried about all of the new. And I think when you get to a point in the national rankings, and this is kind of where Michigan, this is where USC come into play, Alabama, BYU, you get into territory, there's a lot of questions with these teams. And so I think the confidence ought to be, Kiffin's done it before at Ole Miss. They figured out the right system to where there's not that massive transition period this time at LSU. The high expectations really do worry me, because when I look at that schedule, I see if they lose to Ole Miss and they lose to Texas A&M, I think they could run the table, but it's going to be tough because you still got to play Texas, got to go Tennessee and Alabama. And a team with a bunch of transfers, if things go wrong early, do they get better during the year? I think they do, but that's why I think they really need to win one of those games early, like at Ole Miss or Texas A&M. I think one of those wins could really kind of change the whole trajectory of where this is going in year one. It is very difficult to import a team, but we have seen it has worked, whether it's on like conference level or the playoff. I mentioned Indiana. We've had other teams with success of transfers coming in too. So it's doable. I don't necessarily feel great about it, but I think it's doable in year one, especially if Sam Leavitt is healthy game 1 to game 12 and he plays up to his potential that we saw at Arizona State.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Steve, because that was right where I wanted to ask you how much of that playoff prediction is dependent on Sam Leavitt being available, because as I go through and watch him play at Arizona State, I've been spending time doing that. I don't know. Maybe I'm on an island here, but I don't really understand these people that are like, "Who's the best quarterback in the portal?" Now, he flashed that at times, but at other times he doesn't. I'm not saying he's bad, but he just, who he reminds me of? And maybe this is not a great comparison, but it's the only one that I could think of. And when I say this name, Stephen, people are going to think NFL and what he did at Oregon. I didn't watch any of that. I just watch these guys in the SEC. He reminds me of Bo Nix, where, and again, Bo Nix is a different player now, and again, apparently he was good at Oregon. I don't hate Oregon. I don't watch that because I just watch SEC. But when he was at Auburn, he would like single-handedly beat LSU on the road, and then the next game it'd be like, whoa, what happened to that guy? You know what I mean? Like he was just so up and down, and that's kind of what I see from Sam Leavitt. Is that a fair assessment, or am I off base?
I think that's a fair assessment, and I think I will say I have been a little surprised when I see top player rankings list and you see like Sam Leavitt's like a top 10, top 15 player this season. I'm kind of like, whoa, I think pretty highly of him as a quarterback if he reaches his potential. But if we're talking that kind of level, that's a little steep given what we saw at Arizona State, because I think the real Sam Leavitt that we saw was in that first season at Arizona State where they got hot, and that's that last half of the season where they won the Big 12, they went to the playoff, they gave Texas trouble in the Peach Bowl. That's the Sam Leavitt that I'd want to see if I'm LSU for the entire year. We haven't seen that because he was hurt. He was a new transfer in 2024. He got hurt last year. There's a lot of unknown here. Like that, the outcomes of his performance seem pretty wide to me. I think maybe the hype on the transfer aspect is you look at who was available. Brenton Sorsby, don't think he's going to be eligible at Texas Tech. Darian Minso went to Miami by design. Like then Sam Leavitt's like your next guy. It's kind of a supply and demand thing as you're looking for like the next big thing at the position. He's got these tools. He gets in this offense and maybe he takes off this year.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, we're getting a lot of love from Ole Miss. So let's do the Rebels next. Shout out JP, Tim Skelton. This guy just wanted you to say his name. I am making his day. Thank you for the donation, JP. I'm counting that as an Oklahoma donation, though, even though that's for Tim. And then shout out Cousin Fred. Those Rebs going at least 9-3, Steven, and or 10-2. Smash the over. I don't care what Lassan thinks. Go. So,
I agree.
He doesn't care, but tell him anyway, Steven. What's the Athlon say about Ole Miss?
I got good news. I agree. I think they're going over. I think my rough kind of first projection for Ole Miss ended up about 9-3. So they were actually the team that I was debating with LSU. I've got Ole Miss at number 6. I've got them number 11 nationally. I said it. I'm not kidding. I spent a night debating LSU versus Ole Miss. I think I typed in Ole Miss one time, left the computer, backspaced it, typed in LSU. I went back and forth. All that to say, Mike, so far, so good for Pete Golding, right? 2 playoff wins. He's built the roster. Everything's going great so far. They haven't kicked off the season yet. That's the best. I think there is just a different level of being a head coach on the part-time. You're jumping into this moving Ferrari in the playoff. Yes, there are difficult matchups, but it's different. You're in that seat now, 365 days a year. There's going to be an adjustment period. I do think Golding has done a great job at assembling the roster through the portal, keeping Chambliss, keeping Lacey, hiring John David Baker. I think all those moves are really solid. What worries me is it's the transition. It's Pete Golding's first year. You also have the offensive line issues. The tackle spots really worry me. Trinidad Chambliss just might be good enough to overcome that. He might move around in the pocket. Not a problem. Defenses will also adjust to him too in his second year as the starter. So I do think this Ole Miss team is right there on the edge of making the playoff in my projections. They were the first team out. And I looked at their schedule and I went, LSU at Florida. I don't love going to Gainesville after you play an emotional game against LSU and you still have to play Texas, Georgia, at Oklahoma. So give me the over, but I'm taking Ole Miss to finish 11th and 6th in the SEC, 11th nationally, I should say.
So like the first team out, right?
Yes, and LSU is the next team above them.
No.
So,
just kick them while they're down, Steven. Just kick them while they're down. Now, we could play the what if game with all these, but this is a fun one. If Charlie Weiss had stayed, would you be slightly more optimistic about Ole Miss, or would that have changed anything for you?
Probably a little bit more optimistic, because it would be basically the same play caller. I mean, John David Baker's was there not too long ago. I think there's a familiarity, but it is a different voice. And so if you have the same voice and the same guy who was in the quarterback room last year, yeah, I could easily talk myself into Ole Miss now. So this is a really hard call for me. I may change my mind like 6 times between now and September when the season starts.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, who knows, Steven? I mean, Trinidad, he could be even better. He's only been on campus about a year down in Oxford. I think a lot of people forget that. Did not go into the season, of course, as the starting quarterback. And the way I heard it, Steven, I don't know if you've heard this, but I guess it was fall camp where apparently Trinidad was the third team quarterback. And they just said, well, hell, he's unstoppable. The third team cannot stop him. Okay, we got to move him up to second team. The second team could not stop him. And they even gave him some first team reps. And they said the first team couldn't stop him. So clearly, that's the guy we know we've gotten here. But he's another one where, I asked you about Mateer being the most improved second-year quarterback. I mean, it could be Trinidad, and that's insane to think about. I mean, we may have not even seen his best football yet.
That is scary to think about for the rest of the SEC, because if he is even better in 2026. I mean, Ole Miss is probably back, like what, in the final 4 teams playing, and certainly probably playing for the SEC championship game at that point. If there is another level that Chambliss can get to, I mean, he could be the Heisman Trophy winner too. It's all on the table, and I think there is a world where you could see that. I mean, the receivers are revamped. I mentioned the offensive line concerns. Like, there are some things about this offense that kind of maybe give you a little bit of pause. But if Chambliss is just better and he's good enough to be in New York for the Heisman ceremony and the front runner, Ole Miss is not finishing number 6 in the SEC. They're probably finishing first or second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be quite the season down in Oxford. Can't wait to see how that all plays out. I'm trying to see if we have any more donations that we've missed. I think we basically got them all here. All right. How about for Cousin Shane donated a membership, I think, or at least renewed his. So how about Tennessee, Stephen? Where you got them? Oh.
For Cousin Shane, I have Tennessee at number 8 in the SEC and number 21 nationally. So this, I think, solidly a top 25 team. And actually, I think I might be a few spots too low in the national rankings for Tennessee. Weird thing to say this, considering it's kind of a fork in the road type of season for Heupel, but he has won 8 games in each of the last 4 years. I have a bit of a trust factor there that, yes, George McIntyre and Faison Brandon are still going to be duking it out for the quarterback battle in August, but I think they're going to get fine quarterback play as the season progresses. It's the pieces around the quarterback that give me a lot of confidence. Deshaun Bishop, one of the SEC's best receiving cores and offensive line. And I trust Jim Knowles on defense to get this group significantly improved. What significantly improved is probably whether or not Tennessee finishes like top 15 or they finish in this 20 to 25 range. And of course, there is a big question about Chaz Coleman, and can Tennessee find some guys to get after the quarterback? So good schedule. I think they've upgraded massively on the defensive coordinator spot, and I trust Josh Heupel to find the right offensive answers. That puts them squarely in the middle of the pack of the SEC and number 21 nationally.
Yeah, and it's funny, Stephen, I hear people talk about what a gauntlet this schedule is. I think the point being, I mean, every one of these Southeastern Conference schedules is difficult, but I don't know. I mean, this is, to me, one of the more manageable schedules in the conference. And I just say that primarily because the toughest games outside of A&M, they're all at home. Texas, Bama, LSU, all at home. Doesn't mean you're going to win them all. That Tennessee lost multiple home games last year, but that is very rare under Josh Heupel. And I think, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Stephen. I think aside from A&M, and we'll see how good they are. I think the A&M is going to be really good this year. But aside from A&M, I could see Tennessee being favored in every road game, again, other than A&M.
I would buy that. Yeah. At Arkansas, at South Carolina, at Vanderbilt, and then at Georgia Tech. I mean, there's some tough games in there, and especially if Tennessee has kind of a weird road loss, kind of like we've seen at times under Josh Heupel. I think they should be favored in those games. And then you mentioned the home games. I think that's what kind of makes this schedule is if you're Tennessee, you're getting winnable games like against LSU and against Alabama in Knoxville. Texas early in the season is probably going to be one of Tennessee's more difficult games. But if you're only an underdog to Texas A&M and maybe Texas, I mean, right there's a path to 9-3 or potentially 10-2 if things break the right way for Tennessee. If this defense improves and the quarterback play is solid, and I think Tennessee will get good quarterback play, I think 21 might be too low for Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, no, again, every situation is different, right? And Tennessee's quarterbacks have very limited experience, but it is kind of comical to me. I mean, just you just kind of expose yourself, and I see a lot of it in the comments. They're exposing themselves, Stephen. I'm just basically anybody where it's just like, yeah, Tennessee doesn't have a quarterback. When literally every year, going back to Hendon Hooker's final year, which is many years now, Tennessee has started a different quarterback, and I mean it's worked out really well. Josh Heupel doesn't have a losing record in conference play, which is not something very many of these other coaches can say. So, I got confidence in them to get it right.
I do too. And it's track record. And even just going back to last season, Joey Aguilar coming in at the end of summer and taking over the reins, and Tennessee's offense was still, one of the better ones in the SEC. I just think there is a trust factor with Heupel, but also, Mike, I mean, think about some of the quarterbacks last year. Trinidad Chambliss was at Ferris State. He was third string. Fernando Mendoza, he was considered a touted transfer, but he ends up winning the Heisman. There's going to be quarterbacks that come out of nowhere this season and end up being really good. I don't know if it's McIntyre or Faison Brandon, but I would trust Heupel to continue to find the right answers. There's a very, very solid track record there of finding a productive guy at quarterback.
Yeah, and Heupel, he generally just goes with a guy with the more experience. And this may force his hand to go the other way, play the more talented guy. And you'd be amazed how many times that's just what you should have done to begin with. You know what?
Go ahead, throw him to the wolves, get him that experience. Because if the battle is close, to me, I think you just go with Brandon. You turn it over to him. He is a true freshman. But, you look at that early schedule, Mike, Furman and Kennesaw State sandwiched between Georgia Tech. Like that game at Georgia Tech, I think is going to tell us a lot about Tennessee, because it's going to tell us a lot about the quarterbacks. Like it's the first high leverage spot for both of them, but also going to tell us a lot about Tennessee's defense. Georgia Tech, under Coach Brent Key, they love to #run the ball. They will test this Tennessee defense and how much better it is. It's going to be a physical nightmare in week 2 against Georgia Tech.
I got a prediction for you, Stephen. By Kennesaw State week 3, Cousin Shane will already be predicting a Heisman Trophy for Brandon Faison. Maybe not this year. I'm not crazy, but at some point it was in his Tennessee career.
I could see that. But if he has a great performance against Georgia Tech, it just increases the timeline, right? Of how fast that prediction comes along.
Exactly. All right. Hey, how about we haven't hit much Texas A&M, Stephen. Where does Athlon have the Aggies?
I have Texas A&M at number 4 in the SEC and number 9 nationally. I am buying this Texas A&M team. Now, I will say I don't necessarily love just picking last year's standings because, as we know, nothing ever works out, kind of like the standings did the previous year. And yes, there are some flaws with this team. We've talked about Marcel Reed and Holman Wiggins, quarterback, OC, plenty of question marks, also plenty of pressure for both, the way last year ended for Marcel Reed and Wiggins as a first-time play caller. But I also trust Mike Elko, and I think we've seen through 2 seasons, I think he'll find the right answers. I think the offensive line is going to be fine. I don't think it's going to be as good as it was last year. But, man, if the linebackers are fine, and let's assume Damian Sanford plays at some point this year, I think this defense is going to be really, really good. And I think this defense can carry Texas A&M back to the doorstep of the playoff. Offensive growth probably determines how high this team factors into the SEC title and playoff picture this year.
Yeah, and, don't forget, I know you're well aware, Stephen, but for much of the season, A&M was undefeated and looking like perhaps the best team in the conference. I know a lot of people doubted it too. They just want to point to the schedule for whatever reason. But I think this is a real opportunity for Coach Elko and the Aggies to kind of assert themselves as one of the more consistent and, title contending teams out of this conference. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, anybody can do it for 1 year. And then we got to make an excuse for schedule or this, that, and the other. But if you do it 2 years, you can't just sit here and say, oh, well, they had too easy schedule. You know what I mean? To me, it would be more about Coach Elko taking over and finally realizing the potential of this program. I think that's on the table for A&M this year. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is if they can do what they did last year against this schedule, it probably answers a lot of questions. Just because you're playing at LSU, they go back to Missouri, at Alabama, they play at South Carolina, Oklahoma, and host Texas. If they get to the college football playoff with this schedule, given what they lost, given the preseason question marks about how the offense is going to look, I mean, doesn't that answer a lot of questions about where this program is under Mike Elko? It seems like that would be kind of like the last step, and we can kind of say, okay, they had all these things to overcome, and they've arrived. Do you think that's kind of fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. And I think that would also mean that, one of the biggest question marks people have when it comes to A&M is, of course, Marcel Reed, that he is really asserted himself. Not that he hasn't already, but just maybe a more consistent is a better word. He has been more consistent throughout the year because they're not going to get there unless Marcel Reed has a really good season, I think.
I think he's had a good offseason too. Like it seems like A&M and both Marcel Reed or Mike Elko, like they're saying all the right things. I mean, he is their quarterback. They kind of have to, but it feels like they're doing all the right things this season to hopefully take his game to the next level. And so I think it is risky to put the offensive controls in a first-time play caller. But at the same time, though, there's this trust factor with Elko. Like he's pushed all the right buttons. He knows Holman Wiggins very well from the last couple of years. He has to imagine that it's going to be a seamless transition, or he is the next really good play caller that was an assistant. So I think Marcel Reed is one of those players, Mike, that there is a ton of pressure on him. And he's also like one of the biggest X factors in the SEC because his play probably determines whether or not A&M is in the playoff or they're outside it. And he's probably going to have to hear this all off season because you can see it now. A lot of people don't believe in him. He can answer a lot of critics this year if he takes A&M back to the playoff.
Well, speaking of X factors, Stephen, another guy that I would say fits that mold, one of the biggest X factors in the conference this offseason is Byron Brown at Auburn. So where do you have Auburn in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine?
I have Auburn at number 12 in the SEC and number 34 nationally. Mike, let me go ahead and make a second bold prediction. Auburn's offense is going to be a lot better this year with Alex Golesh and the USF players that transferred in rather than having Hugh Freeze as your head coach and offensive coordinator, play designer, whatever you want to call Hugh Freeze.
That's too bold for me, Stephen. I don't think you can improve on old Hugh Freeze.
Here's kind of the big picture, Mike. And I guess I should say, it's possible that Byron Brown doesn't work out, but it's not because of the throwing motion. It's not because of what happened in the spring game. I actually think when the lights come on in September and they're playing Baylor and they're playing SEC teams, I think he's going to be just fine. Maybe not all SEC, but I think he's going to play about as well as he can in this system. But I think that's kind of the hope here for Auburn. On one side of things, you've got Alex Golesh, who's this offensive guru. He's bringing over Byron Brown and these South Florida transfers. They should be able to hit the ground running. There is a pretty solid floor already established. And you're pairing that with the defensive guru and DJ Durkin. So you hope you have like the best of both worlds there, a much improved offense with a defense that's solid. Now, the defense has a lot of new pieces, and I am very worried about the offensive line for Auburn, but I think this will be a much improved team under Alex Golesh, and that's why we've got them number 34 nationally and 12th in the SEC, and also picking Auburn to get bowl eligible this year.
Nice, which, in years past, you'd be like, oh, wow, thanks. But they haven't even made that, in 4 or 5 years, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a rough go of it for Auburn. I mean, it's wild to think about one of the proudest programs in this conference, some of the best fans, and yet they have struggled so mightily in recent seasons.
Wasn't the Music City Bowl where they no-showed against, was it Maryland, the last time they made a bowl game?
And he said, I was busy recruiting.
Yeah, that's right.
Get the hell. I mean, they should have fired him that day. You know what?
I don't think we'll hear that out of Alex Golish. I mean, I like his SEC spring meetings. It's like the playoffs, like the last thing on my mind. Like he's actually worried about, offensive scheme and recruiting. Hugh Freeze probably would have had like a 3-page report prepared for us on that one.
Any chance though? Again, going back to what I was saying about Florida and getting hyped and excited about a new coach, which we all, we should all be doing that, because that, in college football, we need optimism. We need things to believe in. And certainly I believe the direction of Auburn now is much higher than it was this time last year. And I basically said that since the day Hugh Freeze was hired. But I believe in the direction a lot more. But any concern, Stephen, that mixing this Golish offense with the DJ Durkin defense, it was a little bit of a shotgun marriage. Any concern that these two schemes don't necessarily gel or work together? Not saying they have to, but it's an interesting fit in my mind. Is there any concern for you there?
A little bit, just because I always like a head coach to be able to pick his staff. You don't want to you have to keep this guy or this guy. I want my head coach to feel good about the guys he's got on staff. And also, it's hard enough when you're taking over a program. And I know that I'm guessing there was probably a lot of player support for DJ Durkin too. And so like if things were go wrong, do people go to Golish? Do they go to Durkin? It kind of creates like a little bit of an odd dynamic there. So it is a little bit of an interesting marriage. It does give me a little bit of concern. I think on the list of like major concerns for Auburn, to me, it's still that offensive line. Like that would be my primary issue this season. And like if things go wrong, the offense doesn't take off. Is there like a offense defense kind of split going on, kind of similar maybe to what we saw the last couple of years?
Mm-hmm. And this is absolutely no fault of Alex Golish's. But the way I hear it, Stephen, I hear this is one of the lowest. I mean, it's kind of crazy to even state it this way, but the lowest paid rosters in the conference. Have you heard how much Auburn is spending on their roster this year?
I have seen some figures. I don't know if they're entirely accurate. It seems
I've heard around 30 million.
Yeah, I see the number I saw was actually a little bit lower than that. I think it was like 25 million. So I hope it's at 30. It probably should be higher just based upon some of the other figures we've seen for rosters in the SEC.
Right. But again, if you're asking a booster who just paid a bunch and you got nothing, I think that's the position Golish is walking into. And again, $30 million is not nothing, but the fact that that's on the lower end, I mean, that tells you the insanity that we're in. But, I would imagine if I'm an Auburn super booster or whatever, I need some results before I'm opening up my checkbook. And I think that's the reality that Golish is entering.
I think this gets at something you and I have talked about a lot, which is the proof of concept is so important. And also it's why bringing guys from South Florida probably cuts down on your transition period. You can hit the ground running offensively. I mean, Auburn's got a lot of losses on defense too. So DJ Durkin's got his workout cut out for him too. But I think there's kind of like a proof of concept that you've now hired Brian Harsin, supposedly an offensive guru. You hired Hugh Freeze, supposedly an offensive guru. I think if you're a big time booster. You want to see Alex Golesh light up the scoreboard before you start to believe in it. But you do get Baylor, Southern Miss, Florida, and Vanderbilt, all four very winnable games to start your season. And then you get Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Samford in November. There is a path to 7-5, 6-6. If things break right, it's 8-4. But I do think, if given the amount of players Golesh is bringing and what Durkin has been able to do in defense, absent some type of injury or something really going wrong, I think 5-7 or 4-8 would be really disappointing and really hurt that proof of concept that I think you want to see if you're Auburn.
Well, that record would also be massively disappointing, Stephen, for the Gamecocks. Where does Athlon have South Carolina after coming off a rough season in Columbia?
Mike, I have South Carolina at number 10 in the SEC and number 28 nationally. If Florida is the most improved team, I think there's a chance South Carolina is just behind them at number 2. For the most part, I think they've had a pretty good offseason. Kendall Briles is an upgraded coordinator, like what they did on the staff, especially with Randy Clements, the offensive line coach. Liked, past tense, what they did in the portal, because we don't know what the status is of Jacarius Peak. I've heard some very different things that give me either great anxiety about where this is or great optimism. So pick your path on which one you like better. He's so important, though, because we know the offensive line is still a massive question mark coming into this year. But I do think Kendall Briles upgrades the offense. I think Lenore Sellers gets back to maybe playing some type of ball that we saw in 2024. And I think the defense is also going to be pretty solid. If they can get Dylan Stewart healthy, find some guys opposite of him who can get to the quarterback, I think this will be a pretty solid group overall. I think at minimum, they get back to a bowl game. If the offensive line is healthy, there's a chance that this team finishes in the top 25.
I don't know if you saw this, Stephen, but last week we were asked to share or rank the best coordinator duos in the conference. I put Florida up there. I put Georgia up there. I put LSU way up there. I had one other. I'm trying to think. I can't recall who I had fourth, but I had number 5. Oh, I had Bama fourth, I believe. I had Carolina fifth with new offensive coordinator Kendall Briles and Clayton White defensive coordinator. Is that a off-base ranking? I'm just kind of curious your reaction to that.
I think the hard part about this is like, what is the criteria? Do you consider head coaches as coordinators?
No,
Because,
I was just doing the coordinators.
yeah, then I would agree with that, because you do have like Elko and Sark and of course Venables at Oklahoma. But I think if we're just going coordinators, they'd be my top 5 too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because the point being, Stephen, I think, it kind of goes without saying, I think Beamer has struck out a lot on these offensive coordinator hires, and hopefully we finally nailed it here with Kendall Briles. But, man, this is a team or a program that, it looked to be peaking going into last season, and then it just kind of completely fell apart. And a lot of that was not the inability to close out games. I think they would have had a lot better record if they could have closed out a couple games. So most people got Beamer on the hot seat. I think that's fair after winning 4 games. And a lot of people think he's out because, I think people just underrate Carolina. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. But I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, is this a team that we got to remember this time last year, they were preseason top 15. I think one place had them number 12 even. They're not that far removed from that. So I don't think this is like some foregone conclusion that Carolina is going to be awful and everybody's going to get fired. Do you?
I don't. I would agree with you. I think certainly it's fair to think that Beamer is on the hot seat because of last year's disappointment. But I think there is a path for this team to be significantly improved. And I think probably it is as easy as and as simple as this sounds. They have a quarterback who is capable of taking them to the doorstep of the college football playoff. We saw this in 2024. Lenore Sellers was awesome down the stretch of that season. He's got to get back to kind of being that caliber of player, and I think Bryles can unlock that. I think there's kind of like a confidence thing too. The offensive scheme wasn't great, offensive line. A lot of it was on Sellers to just create something last year. I think the hope is you can kind of stack some good plays, easy throws, or able to run the ball better. So to me, I actually would have probably ranked South Carolina in the top 25 had I known Curious Peak in the offensive line situation. South Carolina and Florida were pretty much neck and neck in my power rankings. That's why they're kind of 26 and 28. I think this team is very close to being a top 25 team, largely because of Lenore Sellers coming back.
All right. And then, hey, how about Arkansas, Stephen? Now we're at the bottom. Shout out Razorbacks. Man, they deserve better. I heard their baseball team just humiliated themselves, so I'm not laughing at you. But hey, it's football time now, I guess, in Vietnam down there. Where are we getting any better, Stephen, in Fayetteville? And we earlier with Marler, he called the coach Springfield. I mean, people don't even know the guy's name. I guess he's got to earn that. But is he going to earn it this year? Where does Athlon have Arkansas?
Mike, I hate to be hate to deliver some bad news, and I don't want to be Mr. Negative, but we do have Arkansas last in the SEC and 51st nationally. Maybe the best thing here, Mike, it's a fresh start, right? Like fresh starts are optimism. There's something new in Fayetteville. There's something new to get excited about. I think the Ryan Silverfield hire brought a lot of skepticism nationally. I'm not quite in that boat. I think that he can do some things on the roster management side, and we saw that at Memphis. We saw it at Arkansas. I think he's hired good coordinators. I think he's doing everything right from an off-season perspective. I think at the most basic level for this team, offensively they were so good last year because of Taylor Green. They're due to regress just because but the quarterback is a massive question mark. Arkansas has finished 10th or worst in the SEC in points allowed for 5 straight years. Mike, SEC games, 5 straight years that they've been at the bottom of the SEC in defense. That has to change. So I think as much as the quarterback play is going to be a focus this offseason, and rightfully so, how far Ron Roberts improves this defense this year and next year probably makes or breaks Ryan Silverfield's tenure in Fayetteville. I know it's boring to say this. I think the biggest thing for Arkansas is to show progress during the season. I have a hard time finding games in SEC play they will be favored in, but I think from what we saw the last couple of years, losing due to turnovers, losing due to last minute stuff, if you can cut that out, and if you're just competitive, you're getting a little bit better every week, you may only be 3-9, 4-8, but I think that goes into next offseason with some optimism. I know that's not ultra positive, but I think progression is the key here for Arkansas this season because of where they are on the roster front and where they were last year.
Well, I would ask you some follow-up, Stephen, but I'll start crying if we keep talking Arkansas. So let's move on to Kentucky, where they are over the moon on new coach Will Stein. It's almost the exact opposite there of Arkansas. Where does Athlon have Kentucky?
Mike, I have Kentucky at 15th in the SEC, number 49 nationally. So even though we've got Arkansas last, like not that far from the pack, I think all these teams are going to be pretty competitive nationally relative in the power rankings. Obviously, there is a ton to be excited about if you're Kentucky. Kenny Minchie, the Notre Dame transfer at quarterback, Will Stein, offensive guru, rising star taking over. I like what they did in the portal along the offensive line to upgrade that group. There's a lot of potential here, but there's still a lot of questions with this Kentucky team. Like, how does it fit together? How, as a first-time coach, does Will Stein adapt to life in the SEC? Jay Bateman, also not one of my favorite coordinator hires of the offseason. They gave up almost 30 points a game in the SEC last year, so they have some room to grow. And I think they got a hard schedule too. So I think much like Ryan Silverfield, progress for Will Stein, build on that, and take a step forward in 2027. I'm just not there with some of the ultra optimistic takes on Kentucky. I think they'll be better, but I don't know that it shows up to get to a bowl game this year.
Yeah, and you look at that schedule, you see why Kentucky was one of the primary forces against going to the 9-game SEC schedule. That's probably, aside from that massive buyout he got, that's probably one of the things that please Stoops the most. Good luck next guy, because you're going to need it. So that's you, Will Stein. Good luck. You're going to need it this year.
I mean, Mike, just look at the potential top 25 opponents that they play. Louisville, Tennessee, I have ranked in the top 25. Oklahoma, LSU, Texas A&M, Alabama. That's not taking into account that South Carolina, Missouri could be favored. Vanderbilt was ranked last year. This is a brutally difficult schedule. So yes, if I was Mark Stoops and still working at Kentucky, I'd be complaining about 9 games in the SEC too.
All right, we saved the nerds for the last, Stephen. Vanderbilt. Where does Athlon got the Commodores?
We have Vanderbilt at number 14 in the SEC and number 45 nationally. So a pretty steep drop in the national rankings for Vanderbilt. 2 ways to look at this. Diego Pavia was super, super valuable to the program, to the offense, I think to the entire culture, to the whole Clark Lee tenure. He's going to be missed. I think the other side of it is you have to kind of trust Clark Lee because the program has come a long way in the last couple of years, and it feels like the floor is pretty established. Like they're not going to regress from, contending for the playoff to 2-10. There's probably a middle ground, and I think that's kind of where this team settles. I do think they're going to be one of the more interesting teams to watch because of Jared Curtis and a true freshman starting in the SEC with some nice skill talent around him. Ced Alexander, Junior Sherrill, the tight ends and Connor. I am worried about the offensive line, and they were 89th in the country in defensive success rate last season. So need to see this defense take a step forward to help the young quarterback. From a schedule perspective, though, they play Auburn, they play Arkansas, they play Mississippi State, they play Kentucky. Those are 4 of the bottom teams in the SEC, and they have a winnable game against NC State and non-conference play. That is a schedule that should get Vanderbilt back to a bowl game this year, despite all that they lose with Diego Pavia.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? That, we bring in Clark Lee, defensive guy, and yet it's kind of like the offense and the coordinator and the quarterback that have really saved this program. It's time. Now, again, they have their own unique challenges at Vanderbilt, but I think it's time for the defense to kind of assert itself that in Clark Lee's program. And I'm not saying they got to be dominant, but they can't be such a liability that they have been at times.
It's weird, isn't it? Because I think when Clark Lee was hired, I think that's one thing we always kind of expected was like, well, they may not be great in the win column, but at least Clark Lee would put together a solid defense, right? At least that's kind of what I expected when he was hired.
And I'm still waiting. No.
Yeah, right. Still waiting on it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I just don't think it's very realistic. Again, we don't even know it'll be Jared Curtis, but it's a safe assumption. Even though they do have they've got some guys that could play that have been there in the system. So that's why it's not we shouldn't assume it, but you don't bring in a guy like that to sit. But point being is, the point being is you don't ask a true freshman to bail you out time and time again. Yeah. Not in this conference.
But Blaise Berlowitz had a pretty good spring at Vanderbilt. So to your point, you do have a guy who's been in your system and he was at New Mexico State to lean on if Jared Curtis isn't ready. But you don't land a 5-star at Vanderbilt and I'm sure pay him the NIL to be the number 2 quarterback. You're paying him to be the new face of the program, you hope, for the next 3 years. It's got to be.
Yeah, we don't want another Nico situation where he's leaving because he needs more money. You know what? So, yeah, I would imagine it's going to be the Jared Curtis show immediately and ride him for as long as he's going to be there. But, Stephen, we've got over 2 hours. I'm trying to keep track of all these donations. Texas is blowing everybody out of the water. So, as of right now, Texas... Now, again, we're going to keep a tally all week, but Texas, Missouri, and Georgia right now are our fall camp preview series for next week. Again, we'll be keeping a tally all week. Bama's in the conversation, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, LSU. Those are also contenders. I just want to keep that posted. And we'll be back tomorrow with Cousin Shane. We'll be talking something and we'll be tallying these donations. Stephen, before you go, can you remind the audience how to follow you, how to find your great work, and how to order the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine?
Absolutely, Mike. At Athlon Sports on Twitter. You can follow me at Athlon Steven on Twitter as well. I mentioned it at the start of the show. Bookstores, grocery stores, newsstands are a good place to find it. I will tell you, I have had a lot of trouble the last couple of years finding it because the newsstand is like shrinking. Best place to find it is athlonsports.com. You can go to magazines at the very top and we'll ship you whatever edition you want. That's the easiest and the best place to order it. And while you're there, you can pick up a copy of our NFL and our fantasy football guide to get you ready for those two as well.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate each and every one of you. Like, subscribe, share, trying to get this subscriber count up. We just gave you 2 hours of commercial-free SEC football talk on June 1st, Monday night. You ain't getting that anywhere else. Help us stay independent. Support the show. That's going to do it for each and every one of you. We'll be back tomorrow with Cousin Shane as long as he's not on the golf course. Bye-bye.
Hey, buddy, this beer's for you, Mike, and Cousin Shane. That SEC podcast loves the Pirate, and the Pirate loves that SEC podcast. Hail State.